Evidentiary defense team has provided the Chamber with a copy of a chart which it wishes to use in putting questions to the expert. The Chamber rules as follows. The chart was accompanied by an email which, in the view of the Chamber, which has had very little time to review this material, has added to the confusion rather than clarified the matter. This underlines the need for parties who wish to refer to documents to have put those documents on their lists many weeks ago. This court operates on the basis of a case file and on the basis of no surprises. Material to be used in the trial should generally be known to all parties well before the expert or the witness comes to court. Professor Chandler has been scheduled for many months now, and the Chamber and the parties were all well aware of this. Consequently, any document discussion is being held, or the parties, rather the Evidentiary team, is attempting to hold a discussion about documents far too late. Speaking now about the chart itself, it has no formal status before the court. It lacks relevance, or the material referred to in it lacks relevance, as this expert has said that he is not an expert in demographics. Consequently, any material that might be any substance of any of the documents that might be used in questioning the expert, which relate to demographic material, may be of very little use to the Chamber, given his disclaimer of expertise. Finally, in the body of the email that accompanied the chart, there was reference to a request that had been denied. The Chamber should not need to specify that if material has been denied, it cannot be used in any way in questioning the witness. That is the ruling of the Chamber, unless there is a matter, given the urgency with which the Chamber is forced to deal with this matter, that any of my colleagues wish to clarify or add.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to everyone in and around the courtroom, and a very good morning to you, Mr. Chandler. But before we go into the questioning, I do need to clarify the record to make sure. The chart is for illustrative purposes. We were not seeking to use the chart as evidence. It was merely to guide the process of the questioning. It is a technique that is used throughout the world, including all international tribunals, and therefore I simply do not understand the trial chamber ruling that somehow we're trying to do something that is improper. Second of all, out of the 10 documents, 6 are already before, so only 4 additional ones were attempted to be used. All documents, might I add, are documents that the gentleman has generated. Thirdly, while the gentleman has indicated that he is not a demographer, the point of the exercise had I been allowed to do so, although I will attempt to pose some questions in this area, was to show that if we are to look at this evidence, or the documents that the gentleman has produced, you will find that he cites no authority. And that is the point. The point is that he is simply, I'm entitled to make my record, sir. You can object all you want. He's making assertions without attribution. My question is, if he's not a demographer and he's not an expert, where does he come up with these figures? That's the thrust of my question. Now I'll be more than happy to hear the objection.
Well, Your Honor, this is a technique that was repeated in this courtroom, in which the chamber has ruled out of order. There is no right to make a record. The record is the transcript. The final word on this should have been the trial chamber's ruling, and counsel should respect that when people move on.
That may be the case in some instances. However, when we are being publicly chastised for being unprepared, trying to do things that are inappropriate, and where we believe mischaracterize our efforts in trying to help the trial chamber get to the truth, we feel it is our duty, it's a public duty.
Counsel, please move on to put question to his expert. The request has already been ruled. So the time is now given to you to put question to the expert. And please comply with all the decisions that have been issued and ruled by the chamber. In particular, in regards to the documents submitted before the chamber, and in particular the new document and the procedure of requesting to put out the press document before the chamber, and other decisions that we ruled regarding these matters. And I'm sure that we will not use this opportunity to make other statements besides putting question to this expert.
Dr. Chandler, yesterday you indicated that you read a study on demographics by a Patrick Avalon. I may mispronounce the name. In looking at that particular document, it would appear that it was published somewhere in 1998. Are we referring to the same study?
Yes, there's only one that I'm aware of.
Now, prior to 1998, however, you have written on several other occasions, in particular 1991, 92, 94, and then thereafter, wherein your publications, you have a variety of death tolls, anywhere from 1 million, over 1 million, 1 in 8, 1 in 7. At one point in 1999, you go and say 1.5. Then at some latter point, you raise it to 2 million. You also have various estimates for violent deaths, ranging from 100,000 all the way to 400,000. And in looking at your earlier publications and even your latter publications, it would appear, but in particular your early ones, that when you come up with these figures, you cite no authority. Yesterday, having told us that you're not a demographer, can you please explain to us how it is that you came up with these figures? And for the trial chamber's convenience, the relevance goes to his methodology as a historian, because it calls into question much of his historical work that he's done. So please tell us, how did you come up with these figures?
you. I hope that my variety of these figures running from over 1 million in 1990, before I was able to come back to Cambodia, to somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million, the figures I've consistently held since then. These reflect the demographic studies that were available to me when I was writing. I'm sorry I didn't cite those particular studies. They're the same ones I've always used. Estimates have since come up in various documents that I did not. Many of these sources that you're citing, which I can't see or can't see what they were, and I'm surprised I wasn't allowed to look at this chart at some stage, but you're still referring to it, obviously, were journalistic articles that didn't have footnotes. Other things, I did cite Evelyn and also Lewinsky. I hope that my inconsistency with these figures, which I'm not particularly proud of, because these figures nobody knows these figures. If I had an exact figure, I would certainly use it. These are all estimates. I hope that this doesn't, as you suggest, call into question my historical work in other places, because I don't think it does at all.
First, let me assure you that I'm not referring to any journalistic opining that you might be making for the press or for public consumption, but rather I'm referring to your scholarly work as a historian. And might I ask, is it a common practice for a historian to make assertions without giving attribution where certain assertions such as figures of this nature come from? Is that part of the scholarly process, or the historian, someone the likes of you, has been coined to be the doyen of Cambodian history?
Please wait till the microphone is on before you subscribe to respond to the question.
This as well, I probably should have been more controlled. Okay. Yes, sometimes it is a practice. Otherwise, historical documents would look like the court order. I could never write a 300-page book with 4,000 footnotes. That's a particular form of historical writing that I don't indulge in. Sometimes when things are... Sometimes I should have cited sources, probably. I'm claiming only on these figures that they reflect things that I've read, and the sources that I drew them from were ones that I told you about yesterday.
Now, just a couple more questions on this demographics. I don't want to belabor the point. If you're a historian, not a demographer, you're throwing out these figures without us knowing where they come from. And you claim that you have looked at what others have done. You cited one study, which is back in 1998, of an actual demographer. You also cited a gentleman from France who had done an earlier study. What gives you confidence that what they produced was actually accurate and reliable, if you, in fact, are not a demographer? And from what appears from your testimony, you never consulted with them to see what is the process, what sort of sources they use, etc., etc.
Well, the sources for Mr. Evelyn's study are cited in his article. I wasn't prepared, and I'm never prepared to get in touch with a writer to question his footnotes because I have doubts about his sources. I can't do that with every article I read, or I'd never write anything. I was confident that these two books. I like the findings of these two books. They're two studies, rather. One's an article. I did not find convincing contradictory evidence from other published sources. These sources, and as I probably should have said more often in things I've written, and I do regret that, the actual figures will never be known. There was a census in 1962 and not another one until 1998. Between then, all demographers are operating, and other writers and many other historians have wandered into this field besides me, let you say, have been using those two census figures as benchmarks to how to work out what happened between 1970 and 1979. So this is the best I can do, I'm sorry to say, or happy to say.
Do you recall whether Mr. Haveline, what was the sources that he used? Do you recall offhand?
No, I do not recall offhand. I would recall, of course, if I saw the article again. I've read it several times in the past, but not recently.
Would it surprise you that it was the 1992 election that was the starting point?
Not if you're looking at the document, I certainly wouldn't contradict that.
Very well. Let's move on to another topic, and we're going to spend probably the majority of our time together, which is what you've been telling us here in the report. I don't know if you're going into any documents or not on file or placed on the report, so I wouldn't trouble there. I can call up the page if necessary. At some point, on page 24, would have been the first day, slightly after the time 10.02.11, you were asked about the book full part future, and you were asked to identify the authors of the document, and in that, you gave us the answer that you could not, other than one particular document, you could not identify who the authors were. And then you said, I was thinking we were making a guess at some point. When you assigned Paul Pot to one particular document itself. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And when you say that was a guess, that's an assumption that you made as a historian.
Yes.
Later on page 26, you write about time period 10.05.42. You indicated that you do not know how many exact copies, the numbers of copies of each of the documents that were circulated. And then you say, we go on to say, and this is on page 26, lines 13 to 16, that it was probably 10 to 15 copies of these minutes that would have been prepared at the time. I'm wondering, where did you come up with this figure, 10 to 15 copies? Was this another guess on your part, or do you have any card or knowledge on that?
No, this was not guesswork. Some of the documents contained lists of the people to receive copies. The number of people in different documents varies, but sometimes 6, 7, 8, 10 in there is a small, very small group. It is not open. It's not an open guess on my part. It's a very limited audience, and often the specific addressees are listed at the end of the document. These are the standing committee things particularly, we're not talking about the speeches here.
All right. Moving on, this is mostly for clarification purposes. You were asked again about the authenticity of those documents, my guess is, that my conclusion rather is that these are authentic. So again, I'm not trying to force an answer, but it would appear that when you say I guess, or my conclusion, your conclusion is a guess, is it not?
The President, Dr. Chandler, could you please hold on, wait until we hear from the co-prosecutor since on his feet he may proceed.
The problem here, Your Honours, is that the expert is being given a couple of words taken out of context out of a much longer statement he made. And if you look at the page, we're just managing to keep up with our learned friend, but if he reads the whole quote, it becomes clear that the nature of the professor's conclusion becomes clear. It starts with the words, "No, I have no doubts as to its authenticity." And then he continues to explain as to how he came to that conclusion. I think it's unhelpful if words are taken out of context and the word guess appears here and there. Can convey a completely different nature of the answer to that which was given.
I'll be more than happy to read the entire quote, President. I am trying to save some time, and we are before professional judges. But let's go through your answer. No, I have no doubt as to its authenticity. I don't know where those doubts, how they could be, how they could arise, or how they could be settled. And one could say that these documents are forged. The evidence, I don't know where that would come from, the documents, but they're not forged. I don't know where that ever has come from. So my guess is that, my conclusion rather, is that these are authentic documents that survive more or less by chance. Are you not saying that you guess? And then you go on to say your conclusion. Is not your conclusion a guess? I guess that's what I'm trying to get, and I'm trying to get you to clarify this.
I think I clarified my use of the word guess by suggesting that it was my conclusion. I don't see where this is leading at all.
I'm not quite sure I understood that circular answer. So are you saying when you say that that was your conclusion, that your conclusion was a guess? Or was that just a matter of speech? And we are in court, and I apologize if this seems to be amusing to you, but this is how it's done.
I apologize if I seemed, I'm certainly not amused by some of these things here. I want to be more serious. I apologize. I was giving the wrong impression. But the preceding parts of the document of the statement were showing the bases of my convictions. I did not say my wobbly conviction is, or geez, maybe just possibly. I changed the word guess as I was talking, as people do when they're talking, as I was doing, not writing. I would never say, I guess, I mean, I conclude, in a written work. I could see that the word guess was too loose to describe what I'd said in the previous 2 minutes. So it was a conclusion, and I stick by that.
Thank you, Dr. Chandler. Perhaps I should explain that the record is what we're left with, and you don't want to be guessing what you meant by something, and that's why I'm taking this opportunity to apologize to everyone if it seems obvious to everyone else, but it doesn't seem obvious to me this time. Later on page 30, you were asked a question by Judge Cartwright, and this would be right below 10.13.51. This is the same document requiring reporting to 870, the party central, and it also refers to the plan to produce 300 rights and so on and so forth. And then it goes on, the question goes on, in your research, have you been able to establish whether these policies were pursued during the period was a collective leadership in the country so that the title may be a bit catchy, so on and so forth. And then you go on to say, this is right after 10.16.49, line 15. I gathered from the closing order, which I have been reading, that some of these weekly reports are now have become available, are coming into Central Committee. And I guess here's what I'm trying to get at. I'm trying to get you to explain to me. On the one hand, you say that this was a collective leadership, and then you seem to be saying that some of these policies that you're discussing, some of the information at least, is coming from the closing order itself. Am I reading it right?
With respect, I don't think so. I think all I was saying at that point was that the document refers to, Pol Pot Plans the Future refers to reports are required from the countryside, and I said, now we know that these reports came in. That's a footnote. I didn't cite what the report said, and it wouldn't have altered the first part of the statement to which that refers. No, I think it's, and as for the collective leadership, I think I've made that point many, many times. But I think a book called The Collective Leadership of Cambodia as Plans to Govern the Country would be an unsellable book. And that's the way books are written, I'm afraid. Pol Pot is still a fair word to use because he was the chair of the Central Committee, and his decisions governed or overrode any negative opinions that might, I only say might, have come up from other members.
All right, and we're going to get to that. But I appreciate that explanation. But then when we go down further down, and perhaps I should focus on this part, where you do say, I've gathered from the closing order, which I have been reading, that some of these weekly reports are now have become available, are coming into Central Committee. Now, yesterday you told us that you did not have access to the supplementary material that was in the footnotes, other than what was provided to you by the trial chamber in preparation for your testimony. You told us that you only read the closing order when you came here and you requested to read it. So if I look at this sentence, are we to conclude that, at least with respect to this part of your answer, it is the closing order that is assisting you, and not some independent research that you have done years in advance, having access to archived material, hopefully primary sources?
Yeah, the answer has to be certainly, but the point I was making in that point was, it's interesting that some of these documents have come in since. That's all I was saying. I was not saying anything else than that. It might not have been, and I was also taking, maybe I should question every sentence in the closing order. I don't have time to do that. I thought it seemed absurd to think that these documents cited in the back of the book are invented, so I wasn't able to reach them in time, but I accepted that sentence as an amplification of my statement.
Thank you very much, Professor Chandler, for that answer, because obviously that's what we're here for. Because we do challenge the closing order, we do challenge what is being cited at times, and it's our submission that the closing order may contain errors. And that's why I asked whether you had done your due diligence, although we know that you did not have access to the documents, and that was not your remit before coming here. But suffice it to say, you're relying on the text, and you have not checked the documents themselves that support the text to see whether, in fact, what is cited in the closing order, drafted by the prosecution, then Afterwards, it was confirmed by the investigative judge after they'd done their so-called investigation, but you did not do your due diligence, did you?
The President, International Court Prosecutor, you may now proceed.
Your Honours, not only is counsel testifying and expressing opinion about other phases of these proceedings, but he's also asking a question which the Professor has now answered at least twice.
I'll move on to my next question, Mr. President.
The President, counsel is advised to put specific clear questions so that the witness can respond without asking him to make his own statement, but you should rephrase the question indeed.
Thank you, Mr. President. If we could move on to another segment of your testimony, and this would be on page 36, and the question, the closest time period is 10.26.07. You were asked, and it would appear from the question, did Nunchia's his specific responsibilities, that is, mean that he had less knowledge of or influence on the whole of the activities of the CPK? That was the thrust of the question. And then your answer is, I think he deferred to Pol Pot as the secretary. He certainly, Pol Pot had the final word most of the time in these decisions, collective decisions. But from my work and from material I have been reading just very recently, and the things and materials that have come out in the closing order, it seems that he was very much on top and engaged in the day-to-day policy matters on all parts of the Cambodian enterprise. Now, let's look at your answer. You say that Pol Pot had the final word most of the time in these decisions. What do you mean by most of the time, and what do you mean by these decisions as opposed to other sorts of decisions?
I think I was being prudent to say most of the time because I have no way of saying all of the time. So it was, again, a supposition. I think there's plenty of evidence about Nguyen Chia's activities. Many of them he's admitted himself in public documents as being a person who was very much involved with the governing of Democratic Cambodia and very much the second person in the chain of command, if you like. When I was saying things that I've read recently, I was not necessarily referring to the evidence in the closing order that I cited. I should have had the passages, and this is all on the first day. I must say I was getting my sea legs. I don't think my testimony was as good as I might have made it later in terms of clarity for your purposes. I apologize for that. But I was reading, had I gone to the back of the book, and I can do that if you like, because I've got the order back in my hotel, I can do it tonight. I think a lot of these statements about his high authority came from open sources rather than from witness statements who watched him doing this, because I think that would be rare. But I'd have to verify that.
Okay, well, Professor Chandler, I'm talking about Pol Pot. I wasn't referring to Nguyen Chia, and I understand that was the question, but I'm focusing on your segment where you say Pol Pot had the final word. Because as we go through your testimony, you talk about collective decision-making, but you also acknowledge that Pol Pot had the final word, and at one point, in fact, you indicated that he could veto whatever was done. And I guess my question to you is it your testimony that Pol Pot was not first among equals, but in fact he was number one and could do whatever make any decisions he wanted, with others who might have been in a particular body would have to go along.
Well, that's a good question, a complicated question, and the point is, I think I've made this point many times. In collective leadership, and particularly in the leadership of other communist countries, the secretary of the party has the last word. That's it. No one overrides the secretary of the Communist Party, secretary of the Central Committee. No one overrides him. The decisions reached. This has been characteristic of the CPK throughout its life. Are reached following discussions. The standing committee meetings that we have, very small example, shows that in every case there was discussions first, then a final statement by the secretary, and the ones we've got, and this was obviously the binding statement. So he's first among equals, but he's first, and he is the person in charge. And in public statements, including his public documents, including his autobiography and other places, Nguyen Chi has admitted this repeatedly. This was the man in charge, Pol Pot, of a collective group.
And are you suggesting, and I'm not trying to put words into your mouth, I'm just really trying to understand your answer, are you suggesting that in light of Pol Pot's authority and power, that he did not or could not make decisions on his own and then impose them as the will of the collective?
Well, in the absence of those perhaps 300 standing committee meetings that we don't have, I can't answer that definitively, but I have never seen any evidence from anybody that he, well, that's not quite true. Long after the purview of this trial, on occasion in the 1990s, it seems like Pol Pot sometimes made collective leadership. It disbanded, made some decisions on his own. During the DK period, we have no evidence that this ever happened. There's no evidence that the standing committee was not, most cases, cohesive. I say most cases because some of them were taken away and executed. But certainly there's no evidence that there was any public disagreement that he overrode with a singular decision. The atmosphere was collegial. This was a place where I think he was given this authority, but I don't have the evidence that he ever used a one-man authority to override the collective view of all his committee. And I also think that had that ever happened, some serious events would have happened inside the committee, but that is an assumption.
Well, you're assuming that there was 300 some meetings. Are you not? Do you have the documentary evidence to show that these meetings actually occurred as they were scheduled or planned or projected to occur? Or are you just throwing that out there?
I'm sorry, I'm not throwing anything out there. These documents, I do not know that the meetings for which we have these documents occurred. How can we know that without having been there in 1975? Okay. Let me finish, please. It's my red light. The documents, there are other documents that suggest that say these meetings took place on a weekly basis. We have 8 of them. Parlaying out, you'd think a weekly basis, 3 years, you'd get some kind of a figure. I've never decided exactly what it was, but it was many, many meetings of the standing committee. That's an assumption. There's no assumption. I think it would be absolutely idiotic to think that the 7 or 8 documents that we've inherited for our investigations were the only standing meetings that ever occurred. There's evidence that there were other standing committee meetings for which we don't have reports.
And is it your evidence, sir? Is it your evidence that all members of the standing committee attended all standing committee meetings, especially the ones that we don't know about, but we assume, based on your answer, must have taken place?
The President, Dr. Chandler, could you please hold on? Co-prosecutor, you may proceed.
Well, the question misrepresents Professor Chandler's earlier evidence. The professor has not testified, and I've listened to his evidence carefully. He has not said that all meetings of the Standing Committee were attended by all the members. The question can be put to him, and he can explain what his findings are. But the question misrepresents his evidence.
That was my question. Perhaps it was inartfully put. Are you suggesting from your answer that all Standing Committee members were attending all meetings?
I wouldn't be, no, that would not be a good suggestion. But before, in your question, you made a suggestion that was made in another question I've had in this thing. What happened at these meetings we know nothing about? Now, how can I tell you what happened at the meetings we know nothing about? I don't know who was there. I don't know how complete it was. The evidence we have is that the Standing Committee is a small group. I would say probably most of the members or all of the members came to the meetings because that's what they were supposed to do. That was their main job. But saying that all of them attended all of the meetings, I'm, of course, completely have no reason to say that.
That's what we're trying to get at, Dr. Chandler. We're trying to get as close to what your actual knowledge is, and when you are making conclusions, to see what the basis of your conclusions are. Do you know whether all members of the Standing Committee attended all discussions that were tabled before or by Pol Pot?
I'd have to review those 15 documents. I think sometimes there were some people absent, but usually it was the full attendance. It could, in fact, be the full attendance, but I don't have those 15 documents in front of me.
Aside from those 15 documents, and I know I'm asking you to provide us information based on evidence that you don't have, but are you prepared to say that Pol Pot insisted or included all members of the Standing Committee on all topics that he was discussing at that higher level?
I have no way of saying that, and also I'm surprised that you're asking me to give evidence for which I have no evidence. I mean, this is what you've been accusing my historical methodology. You want me to go into my sort of modus operandi, which is talking with no evidence, or what?
No, I just want an answer, sir. I'm trying to make a record. Let me go back to this whole answer where you say you try to answer part of it. Where I've been reading just very recently material. What is this material that you've been reading very recently? And then you say, and the things and materials that have come out in the closing order. Now, so we have two things. Material that you have been reading very recently, hence my questioning about Header, and whether Header has been communicating with you recently and about providing you information, documents, not necessarily for your testimony, but just out of for academic purposes. So that's one part. And the other part is, when you say the closing order, you've told us you've had no material related to the closing order other than that was what was provided to you. So again, are you relying on the text of the closing order? And what is all this material you're talking about? So we can do our due diligence.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a good question, and I regret that I wasn't able to bring all my footnotes to the discussion. I didn't know this was the way the discussion was going to proceed, that every sentence I gave in testimony had to be backed up with a footnote. Had these questions been given to me in advance, I would have been well able to answer that kind of question. I cannot do that this way, then or now.
Not to belabor a point, Dr. Chandler, you were asked to provide a list of the material that you were going to be consulting with. Were you not? And in fact, by your own admission, it was 10 days prior to your arrival. And you've indicated to us that since your arrival, you have been boning up and studying the material, including the closing order. Fair to say, nothing would have prevented you from making that list and complying with the court's directive. Isn't that a fact?
Yes, but as my reading went on, I could easily provide such a document to you prior to maybe tomorrow by going over the stuff I've been reading in my hotel. That list could be the work I've been doing since I've arrived. Absolutely.
Now, on the same page later on, right before 10.28.27, you were asked the question, from your research, are you able to say whether all major policies pass through the central or standing committees? And your answer was, which is on the following page, page 27, right above 10.29.04, I can't go to claim my own research. I should note here that I haven't done any primary research on DK since the late 1990s, but evidence has come up since then suggests pretty much a positive answer to your question. And I guess my question to you, sir, is you haven't done any research, but then you say that evidence has come up since. Are you referring to the closing order that you read and the material that is cited, which you didn't look at, or are you referring to other academic books that might have been written by other scholars whom you consider knowledgeable in the area, or a combination of both?
Clearly a combination.
All right. And if I were to ask you to produce us with a list of that, I guess I would get the previous answer.
If you want a list of all the things I've read about DK since 1998, I would not be able to provide you that tomorrow, but the things I've read in the last couple of weeks that amplified some of my previous reading, yes, I could give you that.
Now, on page 38, this is right above 10.21.02, there is a question. You were asked if you could explain the relation between the Central Committee and the Standing Committee, their status, their interrelationship, and in brief, the work that was assigned to each of those committees. Your answer was, I have to say that that's something I have never studied in detail, so I'd rather not make a statement. As long as an overlap between these two bodies, how they were differentiated is not something I have prepared an answer for today, or I would ready to come back to that if you like. But I'm not ready to give a sensitive answer on that. I'm reading off the unofficial transcript, by the way, so I'm sure the sentences are much more elegant. Now, from your answer, it would seem to me that what you're telling us is that throughout your historical work, and what you were focused, because obviously the history of the period is rather large and complex and multifaceted, suffice it to say, from your answer, it would appear that you never studied in any detail, or great detail, the interrelation between the Central Committee and the Standing Committee, hence your reservation to provide an answer to that question. Is that a correct characterization of your answer? And if not, please correct me.
Yes, it is, and I'd like to say I'm sure my prose was just as garbled as you suggest. This is spoken little by little, and I'm not proud of the elegance of some of those answers, that's for sure.
And so when you say that you would prepare to answer it at some other point, can I help me out here? Can I assume what you're suggesting here is that you could look it up in other texts or others may have written, and perhaps even some other material, and then provide an informed opinion? Is that what you're suggesting here?
Yeah, I'm suggesting I might be able to come to a more informed opinion. Had that been followed through with a request to do so, I would have had it ready today, but it wasn't, so I'm not prepared to do it now.
I'm not being critical, but suffice it to say, that sort of, if I may use the phrase, on-the-cuff review of material to provide a more sensitive answer is not one that you would consider, or would you, scholarly historical work where one would delve into primary sources and do the analyses and then come up with a conclusion or an assumption.
I'm not sure where the question was in that, but I would say certainly that any work I could conduct between 2 or 3 days of testimony here with the sources available would probably not be satisfactory to me as a scholar, but would be the best I could do under the circumstances.
Thank you. And that would be by looking at what others may have written, and perhaps what other information might be available.
But certainly by other people, because I haven't written about it.
Thank you. If I could use the analogy, and forgive me if I press on, it would be almost like an open book test. Basically, we give you the question, you go to the books, you come up with the answer.
Your Honours,
The President, Mr. Witness, please wait. We hear the objection by the prosecution first. The prosecution, you may proceed.
It's the same way of asking a different way of asking the same question. It's been asked already about at least 2 or 3 times.
I'll move on, Mr. President. I'll move on. So I'll withdraw that question. If we go to page 40, and this would be right below, or somewhat below, 10.54.33, you're asked a question, and it goes as follows. This would be on line 19. And within that select group, would there have been members of the central or standing committees? And the answer was, well, we think so, but have no direct evidence of that, of course. Now, from your answer, it would appear that you're taking an educated, or you're making an educated guess, or an educated assumption. And of course, qualifying it because you don't have the particular evidence to support it.
President, Mr. Expert, please wait till we hear the objection by the prosecution first. The prosecution, you may proceed.
I'm just asking for counsel to be a bit more specific. The question starts in the middle of a discussion, which in fact deals with the meetings on the 4-year plan. So if counsel can just provide that little bit of introduction for the professors to understand the context in which the composition of the Central or Standing Committee is being discussed.
My apologies. I assumed that the question would have been sufficient given the answer, but with that qualification, can we say that this is about as good as you can do on this particular question? provide us with a guess.
I need to have the phrase select group clarified. That's what I was talking about. What select group are you mentioning in this question?
Well, that was the question. Okay. Let me.
President, Mr. Professor, please wait till the red light is on. And the council, you are reminded to provide a clear, precise answer, a question, so that the professor can provide the response clearly. And as indicated by the prosecution, you should address your question clearly to the expert, because the context of the question is relevant to many parts, since he's been testifying so far.
My apologies, Mr. President. The passage begins on page 39, and you're being referred to what you wrote, where you talk about a select group. The title of the document, Preliminary Explanations Before Reading the Plan by the Party Secretary. And you're being read a passage where you say, and it's in quotes, this is on page 39, starting with line 22, quote, between 21 and 23 August 1976, at a meeting of the Center, not otherwise specified, but probably consisting of a select group of CPK members assembled in Phnom Penh, the party secretary, Pol Pot, spoke at length about the party's 4-year plan. So the select group, Professor Chandler, is what you wrote. Now we fast forward to the following page, line 19, and the question is, and within that select group, would there have been members of the Central or Standing Committee? And your answer is, well, we think so, but have no direct evidence of that, of course. Now you say we. When you say we think so, who is the we? Is that historians in general? Is that these just the way you phrased it at the moment? Or is it the co-authors of the text? Because I believe that they're co-editors or co-authors, I guess.
Well, the answer to the last part of your question is all three. I mean, I probably shouldn't have said we, but I think a consensus would suggest to the high members of the party, that's probably what it was. I think that none of them were there. None of these people was there at this meeting would be inconceivable, since these are people charged with actually implementing some of the suggestions being made by the party secretary. And it's not a guess or an assumption that the person addressing the meeting was Pol Pot, if that's what they said it was being addressed by the party secretary. So thank you for that. I was not quite clear which one of the documents you're referring to, and the select group is never defined, so I was not prepared to define it precisely myself.
All right. But earlier when you talk about, you said probably consisting of a select group. That was part of the text. So the probably, that's a guess or an assumption made on your part that it wouldn't be just Pol Pot and maybe a few people around him, but there may be some other select group other than a particular committee. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at when you say probably consisting of a select group of CPK members assembled in Phnom Penh. That's an assumption that you're making. Because obviously there's an announcement to be made about the 4-year plan, so am I reading it correctly?
Yes. Wish to add there, though, this was a published, widely disseminated document, so I can't believe it was a speech delivered to half a dozen people. It was explaining what was going to happen, supposedly, in the next few months in Cambodia to a large group of people, select because it was, some people weren't asked, but I would imagine, again, sorry for the word, but I don't have the list, that zone and sector people would be brought in here, people with industry, agriculture, those people. The Standing and Central Committee members would be, I can't believe that they wouldn't be at the meeting behind their leader who is talking. So these are assumptions drawn from things such as that the document was not one of the ones discovered in 1979, but was one that was published and available in many copies.
Thank you. Now, if we go on to another question that you were asked, and this would be on page 41 going into page 42. This is right above 10.58.15. And the question is, I'm starting on line 23. My question is, in the context of these meetings, did the word Angka refer only to Pol Pot, or could it have a wider meaning and include other CPK members as well? And I'll read the most relevant part, well, I'll read the entire answer for context purposes, and so there's no objections. That's an excellent question. It's hard to answer. My first impulse is to think this a document which Pol Pot referred to himself as Angka. But on second thought, it seems to me that the word in this context signifies that the decisions was made at the meeting were made collectively by the organization itself. In other words, the people who were at the meeting. That makes more sense to me than having the meeting refer to Pol Pot as the organization, because that just seems like the kind of hierarchy that they did not indulge in. But I'd have no direct evidence of that, of course. I'm not. It's just an assumption on my part. Now, let's go through your answer a little bit. The question was, with respect to Angka, did it refer to Pol Pot only, or did it also refer to, did it have a wider meaning? Did the word Angka refer to Pol Pot much as the term Office 870 also referred to Pol Pot, as you had indicated sometime last week?
Sorry, I don't have that document in front of me. I would just need one little bit of clarification. Where did the phrase come about Angkar? Who was talking? Was Pol Pot talking, or is it in the title of the piece, or what? I'm not sure the context in which the phrase Angkar appears. I think my answer would depend on knowing a little bit more of the context if it was given to me at the time.
Well, if we go further up on page 41, it says a further meeting of the Standing Committee held on the morning of 14 May 1976 with a document number E3/2221 also recorded the attendance of the three accused and considered a report on the sea borders, and an extended summary and directions was given by Pol Pot with a brief commentary by Ieng Sary. And then you're asked the question whether the term Angka in this document referred only to Pol Pot, or did it have a wider meaning? And if I'm mischaracterizing the evidence, I'm sure the prosecution will alert me. It's not my intention, though it's slip-ups do occur. So, in that context, this was the question. But my question now goes back to you is, was Pol Pot referred to as Angkar?
It depends on when and where and by whom. I don't think the people of the inner circle referred to him in that fashion. This was a word that was used to obfuscate the Cambodian population into not knowing who was in charge of the country, the organization. So conceivably, the collective leadership led by Pol Pot could refer to itself as the organization in a private document. But as I said, I don't think the fellow members were putting Pol Pot on a pedestal by calling him the organization. I don't think, again, it's assumptions, but that's my view.
Right, but I mean, setting this document aside, I guess this is what I'm trying to have a discussion with you on this term, because you were asked a question by the prosecution about Office 870, who worked there, I believe was the context of the question, and you gave us an explanation. And at one point in your testimony, you said that Pol Pot was also referred to as 870. And I can't recall whether you said Office 870 or 870. That was one of his code names. Now, if I'm mischaracterizing your testimony, I'll be glad to find it for you. But my question is, was Pol Pot also considered, depending on the context, of course, as Angkar?
Yeah, again, I don't like to quibble, but I don't think he was considered as Angkar. I think his code name was 870. I think inside the leading apparatus, or the head of the machine, as they call it in Cambodia, the Kabal, they wouldn't refer to Pol Pot as Angkar. But the country, in the countryside, as I said in another piece of testimony, people were convinced that Angkar was a person of some sort because they couldn't understand that they're being run by a collective leadership. It had never happened in Cambodian history before. So the name did blur there, but I don't think in the inside, again, I don't have positive proof, but the inner circles, I don't think Ieng Sari, Kisumpan, Nuon Chea would ever have referred to Pol Pot in private or in a document as the organization. Except insofar, as we said earlier, it was the name of a collective decision with which had his approval. So that was we are the organization, not him, by himself.
Well, okay, now there I want to get your answer. You say they make a collective decision with his approval, and you, I take it, you're defending your position that it couldn't be a decision made at the top with the others just going along with it, with the imprimatur of the, say, standing committee. You're not prepared to go that far.
No, I don't think so. No, I'm not. You're right. Yes to your question.
Okay. So in other words, the standing committee would have sat around to discuss what would happen with Koi Toon. They made a decision, and Pol Pot would say, yes, let's off him. Let's torture him and get rid of him. Same thing with Von Vet. They would have sat around, with maybe even Von Vet present. They would have voted on it, and then Pol Pot would make his decision. Is that how we to accept your testimony here today?
The President, Mr. Expert, please wait. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Your Honour's objection as to use of the language, I don't know how it translates into Khmer and French, but the phrase "let's off him" is entirely inappropriate, considering that we're dealing with lives lost at S-21.
I'm speaking of Koi Toon. Let's smash him, to use the terminology that was purportedly used at the time. Are you suggesting that the standing committee, their members, all of them, met, including those who might end up at S-21, to make a decision, and then Pol Pot would just make that decision? Is that how we to understand your testimony, your conclusion? Or do you allow for some other possibility where a group within a group may have made certain decisions at time.
With respect, you're becoming the kind of historian you're accusing me of being. You're making imaginary forays into meetings we know nothing about and making assumptions of what was said. I can't follow along that way. There must have been meetings which we don't know about, where some decisions might well have followed the way you're talking. The evidence of these meetings, we don't have it. The evidence we have suggests that Pol Pot never, I think, jumped ahead of the meeting and said, I don't care what you say, but this is what I'm going to do. He may have done that. We have no idea. This is an imaginary foray, the kind of things you've accused me of 2 days. I mean, we can write history together if that's the way you want to do it, but I don't want to write that way.
That's my point, Dr. Chandler. That's my point. You're claiming that that's not the way Pol Pot operated, but at the same time, in the same sentence, you say, well, perhaps it might have occurred that way. We don't have any evidence. So it would appear that unless you have evidence to the contrary, you're just willing to go along with what you're speculating, which is it must have operated this way and could operate any other way.
This is the way I write. And, of course, there might be an earthquake this afternoon. I mean, might is might. I mean, we don't know. When there are things we don't know, I use the word might.
Let me fast forward, and I'll try to not go through every single instance that I've marked. There's one particular passage that I would like to set a question and answer that I would like to discuss, and that's on page 63. And actually, I'm trying to find the time. It's right above 11.45.20 is the question. And you asked the question, can you explain to us the role of the party within Democratic Kampuchea? And then your answer, and it's a rather lengthy answer, so I will read just only part of it, but I will read it in context, and the prosecutor can correct me if I take anything out of context. You begin by saying, I wish I could really. And then further down on line 12, you say, of course, your question, how the party operated. When you start using a phrase like that, you're getting into the real world rather than in the world of these ambit claims of authority made by the party. I would think any political body has ever been able to act with the kind of absolute, unchallenged, and unquestioned and unambiguous power that this paragraph we've been talking about mentions. That's what's recorded. And the part, and then you go on to the following page, right below 11.46.37. This would be page 64, line 2. But, of course, your question is, how did it operate? As soon as you get into the operations question, you're into the whole real history of DK. That's a phenomenon that's still evolving, that I have no claim to any genuine authority about, but one that I think many people in this room have studied with care and are still coming up with new ideas. So if we could look at this answer a little bit, because I think it's rather revealing in some ways. You're asked about how the party, the role of the party within DK. You begin by saying you wish you could answer that question. And then there seems to be this de facto versus de jure answer of yours. One is theory, but then what happens in practice, well, that's something that you're not prepared or uncertain as far as your ability to answer that question. So why is that?
President, Mr. Expert, please wait. We hear the objection by the prosecution first. Prosecution, you may proceed.
And here again, we run into problems with questions asked out of context. And if we may request, from here on in, if counsel could either give Professor Chandler hard copies of the entire transcript so he can read his answers in full, or display them on the screen, because counsel is selectively jumping through passages of text. The answer was restricted, I think, to a discussion of whether or not the statute entirely reflected practice. And it was in that context that the professor was explaining that the document was never going to accept any nuance, that it was an absolute document, and that there might be a difference with practice. If the entire answer had been read, that would have become obvious. I don't think the court is assisted with this type of disjointed questioning, taking words out of context, and quite frankly, tending to confuse everyone, including the professor. Just for the record, the 3 transcripts in English are approximately 450 pages long. There is a huge amount of material, and the professor should have the benefit of reading his entire answers in full and from a hard copy or on the screen.
If I may briefly respond, we can't have it both ways. You can't allow the prosecutor to act in an adversarial fashion on direct examination and then hold the defense to a civil law tradition where we can only ask open-ended questions on a very limited period of time. If I'm provided with an extra couple of days, I can use that method. I have no objections to giving the gentleman, or any witness for that matter, the entire transcript. I was under the assumption, and perhaps here's where I need to be corrected, that we were providing on the screen the text. I thought that was being done by our case manager. If it is not being done, I truly apologize. That wasn't my intent. Is not to mislead, but put it in the context that the prosecutor just put it. The question that I'm interested in is this de jure versus de facto aspect of it. And I think my question was within context. So may the witness be allowed to answer the question.
The President, we noted that the statement made by the prosecutor was appropriate, and the expert could have read the document put up on the screen by the case file manager. It is true, however, the document appeared to be in sometimes Khmer language, French, English, and that was not friendly enough to the expert. Maybe advise the chamber to prepare the hard copy of the documents you wish to put to him so that he can fully review the relevant portions of the documents before he could respond to your questions. It is for the purpose of clarity, and it is for him to be able to respond to the questions more precisely. Quoting only portion of the text could have misled the witness or the parties involved in the proceedings. We fully understand that we have covered a broad scope of discussion during the last few days, and we feel that the expert may not be able to remember all the details without pinpointing to the precise portion with the submission of the relevant portion to him. So parties and counsels are advised to prepare that those documents to be presented to the witness when such questions are put.
Thank you, Mr. President. I see we're coming up on our break. If we could take the break now then and maybe go until all the way until 11 o'clock, that would be an extra 5 minutes. I think that we would be able to print out a copy, a hard copy for the professor so he could have it available. And my apologies if he has not been seeing it on the screen. I assumed that was the case. But if we took a break now, I think we could do that. And in the meantime, I'll go through my prepared examination and also try to streamline it so that there's no repetition.
The President, Counsel, could you advise the Chamber how much time would you need to put questions to the witness?
That's a very good question, Mr. President. Well, we did start 15 minutes late today, if I could point that out. I had anticipated going until about, we did our calculations based on the 2.5 days that were allocated. At least one of our colleagues did it with some mathematical precision, in fact. And by that calculation, I would have had 7 minutes past 12. That is 7 minutes after lunch. I would be better equipped to answer that question after the break when I go through it. But I do think that the rest of the morning, for sure, it would be helpful if I had a half hour into the afternoon session maximum. I think if with that I could manage. I believe I have until 14:35, I was told. We did our math based on calculating, I think, 12 hours and, I don't know the minutes, of a 3-day period, 2.5 day period, that is.
The President, thank you, Counsel. May we know from counsels from Mr. Kilsampon how much time would they need to put questions to the witness?
Monsieur le Président, selon
by the same calculations, Mr. President, which have been mentioned by my learned friend, then we have up till midday tomorrow to perform our questioning of Professor Chandler. Now, I don't know if I can tell you now if we will use all of this time, because it depends how the questions and answers progress. Some, of course, may be asked by my colleague who precedes me, and I will endeavour to avoid repetitive questions so I can discard some of them as we go along. Technically speaking, however, Mr. President, we have planned in terms of working up to tomorrow at 12 o'clock maximum. Thank you.
The President, thank you, Counsel. The reason the Chamber wished to know the timing, because as the parties and the public have already been apprised of the information that the Chamber would like to also hear the reserved witness during this week. And to help us better manage the time, we needed to know from counsels concerning the time they needed. And indeed, if we can complete the testimonies of Professor Chandler, we may proceed to the reserved witness. However, since it is now appropriate time for the adjournment, the court will adjourn until 11 a.m. Court officer is now instructed to assist the witness during the adjournment.